My brother actually laughed in open court before pointing at me and saying, "She's not a real officer. She just likes pretending people should salute her." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Even my father looked away instead of correcting him. I didn't argue. After 20 years in uniform, I had learned that silence often survives longer than pride. Instead, I slid a sealed envelope across the table. The court clerk frowned at the military markings, broke the seal, and unfolded a set of official JAG orders. Her expression changed instantly. The judge held out his hand without saying a word. As he scanned the first page, the room grew unnaturally still. My brother kept smiling, convinced he had already won. Then the judge slowly removed his glasses and asked the clerk to read my orders into the record. That was the moment everyone realized they had been laughing at the wrong woman. My name is Rachel Mercer, and for most of my adult life, I discovered that the hardest battles rarely happened on deployment. They happened around dinner tables, in family living rooms, and eventually in a county courtroom where my own brother decided I was easier to erase than understand. I joined the Army at 23 and earned my commission through years of study and service. By the time I became a major in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, I had advised commanders through investigations, reviewed operational decisions under impossible deadlines, and spent months overseas helping ensure that military justice survived even when everything else seemed to collapse. None of that impressed my family. To them, Derek was the successful one. He stayed close to home, managed the family business after our father retired, and always knew how to charm neighbors into believing his version of events. I was the daughter who disappeared behind gates with armed guards and came home with stories I couldn't legally tell. Whenever relatives asked what I actually did, Derek would laugh before I could answer. "She pushes paperwork for soldiers," he liked to say. "Don't let the uniform fool you." People nodded because it sounded harmless. I stopped correcting them years ago. My mother often encouraged the silence. "It's easier if you don't make people uncomfortable," she would whisper after gatherings. My father rarely insulted me directly, but his silence cut deeper than Derek's jokes. Every time my brother mocked my service and Dad looked at his coffee instead of at me, I understood exactly where I ranked inside my own family. The irony was painful. Strangers had trusted me with classified legal reviews and sensitive investigations, yet the people who watched me grow up acted as if I had invented my career for attention. The dispute that landed us in court started after my parents transferred control of several family properties to Derek under a broad power of attorney. When I quietly questioned inconsistencies in the paperwork, Derek accused me of trying to steal from the family. Within weeks, lawyers were involved. Within months, we stood on opposite sides of a courtroom. The night before the hearing, I unlocked an old fireproof box in my study. Inside rested a folded service flag, a Bronze Star citation, faded deployment photographs, and a sealed packet containing my official JAG orders from one assignment I had never discussed outside secure channels. I almost left the packet behind. Then I remembered Derek smiling as he told another cousin, "Rachel likes pretending she outranks everyone." I slipped the envelope into my briefcase without another thought. People mistake restraint for weakness when they have never seen discipline under pressure. I wasn't bringing those orders to embarrass my brother. I was bringing them because, for the first time in my life, the truth might actually need to speak for me. The hearing was still 30 minutes away when Derek spotted me outside the courtroom. He was leaning against the wall in an expensive Navy suit, laughing with his attorney, Martin Cole, as if they had already won. When he noticed me carrying my briefcase, His grin widened. Well, look who showed up. He called loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. Did you bring your costume this time? Several people turned toward us. I kept walking. You know, Derek continued, Rachel has spent years convincing strangers she's some kind of military hotshot. She files papers and writes memos. That doesn't make her a real officer. Martin chuckled politely. I'm sure she means well, the attorney added. Titles can sound impressive if people don't know how government jobs work. I stopped a few feet away and looked directly at him. Have you reviewed every document your client submitted? I asked calmly. Martin blinked. Of course. I hope so. That was all I said. Derek shook his head in mock disappointment. There she goes again, he announced to the small crowd gathering near the courtroom doors. Always trying to sound mysterious? A cousin from my mother's side whispered something to another relative, and both smiled awkwardly. No one defended me. Not my mother. Not my father, who had arrived only minutes earlier and busied himself adjusting his tie instead of meeting my eyes. The silence from family hurts differently than insults from strangers. Strangers owe you nothing. Family knows exactly where to place the knife. A clerk emerged from the courtroom carrying a stack of files and called for preliminary exhibits. I stepped forward and handed over my identification along with a sealed military envelope that remained unopened. The clerk studied the markings for a second longer than expected. Would you like this entered into evidence now? She asked. If necessary, I replied. Otherwise, please keep it sealed until the court requests it. Derek laughed again. What is that secret spy paperwork? No, I answered. Just official records. He rolled his eyes dramatically. My sister loves pretending she's in some classified movie. The clerk didn't laugh. Instead, she carefully placed the envelope on top of the stack rather than underneath it. As she walked away, I noticed her glance back twice. Martin noticed it too. For the first time that morning, his confident expression faded ever so slightly. He leaned toward Derek and whispered something I couldn't hear. My brother waved him off. She's bluffing, he said loudly. She always does this when she knows she's wrong. I simply took my seat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom and folded my hands. People often expect confidence to be loud. The Army had taught me the opposite. Sometimes, the strongest position in a room belongs to the person who no longer needs to convince anyone. Then the courtroom door opened, and the clerk looked directly at me. Major Mercer, she said quietly, the judge would like to review your sealed document before proceedings begin. For the first time that morning, Derek's smile disappeared. I followed the clerk into a small conference room beside the courtroom, leaving Derek's smug expression behind the closing door. The room smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, cutting bright lines across the polished table where my sealed envelope now rested. Major Mercer, the clerk said softly. Judge Holbrook prefers to review military documents privately before admitting them into evidence. I nodded. That's understandable. She excused herself, leaving me alone with memories I had spent years trying to keep neatly folded away. People often imagine military service through medals and ceremonies. They rarely picture fluorescent lights in temporary legal offices or exhausted officers reviewing casualty reports long after midnight. Years earlier, I had been attached to a legal support team during Operation Lantern Gate in Kandahar. Our mission wasn't glamorous. We reviewed emergency directives, investigated procurement irregularities, and protected evidence while rockets occasionally landed close enough to shake the walls. One afternoon, a contractor attempted to destroy financial records connected to military equipment that never reached deployed units. I still remembered grabbing the locked case before flames consumed the office. The documents survived. So did several investigations that followed. One young sergeant later told me those missing supplies could have left his convoy stranded in hostile territory. I never considered myself a hero. I simply did my job. That assignment earned me confidential commendations and responsibilities that couldn't be discussed publicly. Even after returning home, portions of my orders remained sealed. Perhaps that silence created room for Derek's imagination. Or perhaps he preferred his version of me because it required less respect. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. Judge Holbrook entered carrying the envelope. He was older than I remembered from the preliminary hearings, with silver hair and measured movements that suggested decades of listening before speaking. I reviewed the authentication page. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, these orders are genuine. I know." He looked at me for a long moment. "You understand your brother appears convinced otherwise. I've noticed." For the first time, the judge's expression softened. There are references here to responsibilities that explain certain issues raised in this case. They may become relevant if opposing counsel continues making factual claims about your qualifications. I'm prepared to answer truthfully." I replied. He placed the documents back into the envelope with remarkable care. "The court values facts more than volume. Major." As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "One more thing. Yes, sir, the signature authorizing these orders belongs to Colonel Evelyn Shaw." I felt my heartbeat slow. She was my supervising officer. The judge nodded almost imperceptibly. "I know that name." He disappeared into the hallway before I could ask another question. Outside, I heard Derek's unmistakable voice carrying through the corridor. "She probably brought fake military paperwork printed off the internet." A few nervous laughs followed. I closed my eyes for just a second. The truth never rushed. It simply waited until the people lying had finished talking. And something told me my brother had only minutes left before he discovered exactly how expensive his arrogance was about to become. When we returned to the courtroom, every seat in the gallery was filled. My aunts sat together in the second row, whispering behind folded programs. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. My mother kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt, a habit she had whenever she wanted to avoid conflict. Derek, on the other hand, looked completely at ease. He greeted people with handshakes, smiled for distant relatives, and even joked with the bailiff before taking his place beside Martin Cole. He thought charm could replace evidence. The hearing began with routine motions, but it didn't take long before Derek's attorney shifted the focus toward me. "Your Honor," Martin said, "my client believes his sister has exaggerated both her professional authority and her understanding of legal matters in an attempt to intimidate family members." Derek nodded dramatically. "She's been doing it for years." The judge looked toward me. "Major Mercer, you'll have an opportunity to respond." Before I could speak, Derek interrupted. "She introduces herself like she runs the Pentagon. She's basically an office employee who got lucky with a title." A few people in the gallery exchanged uncertain glances. Encouraged by the lack of resistance, he continued. "She carries old medals around and expects everyone to believe she's some decorated military leader. Honestly, half the family isn't even sure she was a real officer." His words hung in the room. My father lowered his eyes. That hurt more than Derek's accusations. I remembered being 19 years old, standing in our driveway with a duffel bag over my shoulder as Dad quietly told me, "Just don't expect the Army to make you somebody." For years I wondered if he had been right. Now I realized something different. The Army had never needed to make me somebody. It had simply taught me to stop asking permission to be myself. Judge Holbrook folded his hands. "Mr. Mercer, are you presenting evidence or opinion?" Martin cleared his throat. "We intend to show a pattern of misrepresentation." "Your Honor." The judge gave a slow nod, but wrote something on his legal pad before looking toward the court clerk. She immediately reached beneath her desk. My eyes followed the movement. So did Derek's. She carefully lifted the same sealed military envelope I had submitted earlier and placed it within the judge's reach. The room seemed quieter than before. Even the air conditioning felt louder. Martin noticed the envelope and whispered urgently to Derek. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw my brother dismiss him with a wave of his hand. Then Derek made the mistake that would define the entire hearing. He stood up, pointed directly at me, and said with complete confidence, "She's not a real officer. Ask anyone who actually served." No one laughed this time. The judge rested one hand on the unopened envelope. The clerk looked at him and gave the smallest nod. Then Judge Holbrook spoke in a measured voice that carried through every corner of the courtroom. "I believe," he said, "it is now appropriate to examine the official orders submitted by Major Rachel Mercer." My brother's expression froze before the seal was even broken. The judge did not break the seal himself. Instead, he handed the envelope to the court clerk, a woman named Miriam who had spent nearly 30 years handling official records. Her fingers moved carefully across the flap before she opened it and slid out several cream-colored documents embossed with the seal of the United States Army. She read the first page silently, then she stopped. I watched the color drain from her face, replaced not by fear, but by professional caution. She looked up at Judge Holbrook. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "these appear to be original appointment and assignment orders from the Judge Advocate General's Corps." Derek let out an exaggerated sigh. "Seriously, we're doing theater now." The judge ignored him. "Please continue." Miriam adjusted her glasses and read aloud. "Major Rachel Ann Mercer, United States Army, Judge Advocate General's Corps, assigned under special legal authority to Operation Lantern Gate." Every word landed with the weight of a stone. The murmurs in the gallery faded. Someone in the back row shifted in their seat. A pen rolled off a table and clattered onto the floor, sounding strangely loud in the sudden silence. Martin Cole reached for the document packet. With the court's permission, Judge Holbrook handed it to him. The attorney's confidence disappeared as he examined the signatures. His thumb paused over one line, then another. Finally, he looked at me instead of through me. "These certifications are authentic," he admitted. Derek frowned. "What do you mean authentic? Anybody can print government forms." Martin lowered his voice. "No, not these." He pointed to the authorization block. "The verification codes, the command endorsements, and the chain of command signatures are internally consistent. Fabricating this would constitute a serious federal offense." My brother laughed nervously. "So she found real paperwork somewhere. That doesn't prove she was an officer." Before I could answer, the judge turned another page. "There is additional language here," he observed. Miriam leaned closer. "It identifies Major Mercer as the reporting legal officer on a procurement investigation involving military contract fraud during deployment." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were secret. I had always known what I had done, but because hearing them spoken aloud reminded me of nights spent preserving evidence while explosions echoed beyond reinforced walls. I never wanted recognition. I only wanted the work to matter. Across the courtroom, my father slowly lifted his head. For the first time that day, he looked directly at me, not with pride, not yet, with uncertainty, as though he were realizing he had spent years listening to the wrong child. Judge Holbrook closed the folder halfway and fixed his attention on Derek. Mr. Mercer, only moments ago, you stated in open court that your sister was not a real officer. Derek swallowed. She exaggerated things. The judge tapped the orders with one finger. These documents indicate otherwise. Then he looked toward the clerk again. Please retrieve the attached appendix, referenced on page 4. I believe this court should review it before proceeding. Miriam searched the packet until she found another sealed section, marked with restricted handling instructions. When she looked up, even Martin Cole seemed uneasy. Something buried in that appendix was about to change far more than my military record. The appendix was only 6 pages long. Yet the moment Miriam placed it on the judge's bench, the atmosphere inside the courtroom changed in a way I could almost feel against my skin. Judge Holbrook opened the first page without speaking. His eyes moved slowly from top to bottom. Then he read the second page. By the third, he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses, something I had already learned he did only when considering the weight of what he was reading. Across the aisle, Derek shifted impatiently. Well, he asked, are we done pretending the judge ignored him? Martin Cole did not. Derek, he whispered. Stop talking, my brother frowned. Why? Because I think you're making this worse. Derek scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. There's nothing in that folder except more stories. The judge finally looked up. No, Mr. Mercer. His voice remained calm, but every person in the room immediately fell silent. There are certified records confirming that your sister served as the reporting legal officer in a federal procurement investigation involving military contract fraud during an overseas deployment. Derek crossed his arms. That still doesn't make her important. I almost smiled. He still believed this was about status. It never had been. Judge Holbrook continued reading. The appendix further notes that Major Mercer's recommendations resulted in multiple criminal referrals and prevented fraudulent payments involving operational equipment intended for deployed personnel. Martin closed his eyes briefly. I suspected he already understood where this was heading. The attorney slowly stood. Your Honor, I would like a brief recess to confer with my client. Denied. The single word echoed through the courtroom. The judge turned another page. There is also correspondence attached from Colonel Evelyn Shaw, certifying Major Mercer's assignment and affirming that portions of her duties remained subject to restricted disclosure following completion of the investigation. A woman in the gallery gasped softly. Someone behind me whispered. She wasn't lying. No one answered. For years, my family had accepted Derek's version of me because it was easier than asking uncomfortable questions. Now the paperwork was asking those questions for them. My father's shoulders slumped. He stared at the defense table as though trying to remember every joke he had allowed to pass without objection. My mother quietly wiped at the corner of one eye. Derek noticed neither. He leaned toward Martin. Say something. Martin didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at me. Major Mercer, he said respectfully for the first time Did you personally review legal certifications connected to procurement compliance during your deployment? Yes. And were those responsibilities performed under official authority granted by the United States Army? Yes. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Even the bailiff's expression softened. Judge Hallbrook closed the appendix. This court has now established that Major Mercer is exactly who these records identify her to be. Then he rested his hand on one final sealed attachment clipped behind the appendix. There remains one document I have not yet reviewed. Miriam glanced at the label and hesitated. Your Honor, this attachment concerns the basis for why Major Mercer's name appears in relation to financial irregularities remarkably similar to the allegations before this court today. For the first time since the hearing began, Derek's confidence gave way to unmistakable fear. The final attachment was thinner than the others. Miriam carefully removed the clip and unfolded a single memorandum, followed by two certified exhibits that had been sealed together for years. Judge Hallbrook read the first paragraph in silence. Then his eyebrows lifted. Counsel, he said, looking toward Martin Cole. You should pay close attention to this. Martin stepped forward and accepted the pages. His face changed almost immediately. He turned to Derek. We have a problem. No, we don't, Derek snapped. She's bluffing. Martin didn't answer. Instead, he handed the memorandum back to the judge. Judge Hallbrook cleared his throat. This document confirms that Major Rachel Mercer served as the reporting legal officer who uncovered forged authorization forms and fraudulent powers of attorney used to divert control of restricted assets during a military contracting investigation. The words echoed through the courtroom. Then came the next sentence. The investigative methods described here bear a striking resemblance to the documentation dispute presently before this court. A hush settled over the gallery. I could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above us. Judge Hallbrook looked directly at Derek. Mr. Mercer, your sister's professional expertise includes identifying forged legal instruments. Derek's confidence evaporated. He looked at me, then at Martin, then back to the judge, as if waiting for someone to rescue him. No one did. Martin slowly stood. Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to withdraw several factual assertions previously made regarding Major Mercer's qualifications. Granted, the attorney lowered his voice. I also request an opportunity to review my client's submitted power of attorney documents in light of this new information. The judge nodded. So ordered. My father let out a breath I didn't realize he had been holding. For years, he had watched Derek dominate every family conversation, assuming volume meant honesty. Now, he watched the opposite happen. The loudest voice in the room had nothing left to say. Judge Hallbrook turned toward me. Major Mercer, did you independently identify irregularities in the family documents before this litigation began? Yes, Your Honor. And is that the reason you challenged their validity? Yes, I see. He paused only briefly before adding words I would never forget. It appears this court was asked to doubt the judgment of the very person most qualified to recognize the problem. No applause followed, no dramatic outburst, just silence. A cousin, who had laughed at Derek's jokes, stared down at her folded hands. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Even the bailiff looked away to give my family a measure of privacy. Derek finally spoke. She never told us any of this. I answered for the first time in several minutes. You never asked. The sentence landed harder than anything else said that morning. Judge Hallbrook closed the file. The record will reflect that Major Rachel Mercer's military credentials and legal authority have been fully authenticated. Then he looked at the remaining exhibits from Derek's side of the case. Now, he said evenly, I believe it is time to determine whether the signatures submitted by Mr. Mercer deserve the same confidence. Martin Cole's shoulders sagged. He already knew the answer. The courtroom recessed for 20 minutes. When everyone returned, the atmosphere was completely different. No one was smiling anymore. Martin Cole stood first, holding a fresh stack of papers he had requested from his own office during the break. His voice was steady, but the confidence he had displayed that morning was gone. Your Honor, after comparing the submitted power of attorney with publicly available records and the testimony already presented, I believe additional forensic review is warranted. Judge Holbrook looked toward Derek. Do you object? My brother hesitated. I don't see why we need that. The judge's expression remained unreadable. That was not my question. No, Derek finally muttered. The documents were projected onto a courtroom monitor. Even from my seat, I could see what had bothered me from the beginning. The signature bearing my name had been copied from an old family insurance form created years before my deployment. The spacing was wrong. The pressure marks were inconsistent. Most telling of all, it carried a date from a week when military travel records showed I had been stationed overseas, attending legal briefings under official orders. Judge Holbrook compared the dates carefully. Then he asked me a simple question. Major Mercer, where were you on April 17th of that year? At Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. Your Honor, can you support that statement? Yes. Martin quietly handed the judge another exhibit already contained within my service records. It included travel authorization logs and command certifications, matching the same week. The timeline left almost no room for doubt. My father covered his face with one hand. My mother whispered Derek's name, but he refused to look at her. For years, he had insisted that I was dramatic, secretive, and self-important. Now, every attempt to diminish me was collapsing under documents he could not explain away. Then came the final surprise. Judge Holbrook unfolded a letter attached to Colonel Evelyn Shaw's certification. It had been written specifically in anticipation of situations where my restricted assignments might later become legally relevant. The final paragraph read, Major Rachel Mercer possesses exceptional experience identifying falsified legal authorities and forged transfer instruments. In any dispute involving document authenticity, her observations deserve careful professional consideration. The judge set the letter down. It would appear, he said quietly, that the person this family chose to distrust was also the person best equipped to detect deception. No one spoke. The silence carried more weight than any argument. I looked across the aisle at Derek. He seemed smaller somehow, not because the court had humiliated him, but because the certainty that fueled his arrogance had vanished. When he finally met my eyes, there was no anger left, only confusion. I thought you would have told us, he said. I answered honestly. I tried for years. You decided my silence meant I had nothing worth hearing. Judge Holbrook announced that the question documents would undergo formal examination and that no transfer of disputed family assets would proceed until the review was complete. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I felt no need to defend myself. The truth had done the work on its own. When the hearing finally adjourned, people filed out of the courtroom, much more quietly than they had entered. No one stopped Derek to shake his hand. No one repeated his jokes. The laughter that had once surrounded him had disappeared one person at a time. leaving only the uncomfortable weight of facts that could no longer be ignored. I gathered my briefcase and carefully returned the JAG orders to their envelope. For years, those documents had remained locked away in a fireproof box because I believed my work spoke for itself. I had never imagined they would one day defend me against my own family. As I stepped into the hallway, my father called my name, Rachel. I turned. He stood a few feet away, with my mother beside him, looking older than he had that morning. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You owe yourself the truth first," I replied, his eyes filled with regret. I kept telling myself Derek was just teasing. I thought ignoring it would keep the peace. It didn't, I answered gently. It only made it easier for him to keep going. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at the sealed envelope in my hands. "I never asked what you actually did in the army." "No," I said. "You never did." He nodded slowly. "I should have." Those 4 words meant more to me than any dramatic confession could have. They did not erase the years of dismissal or the birthdays when my deployments became punchlines. They did not undo the silence that followed every joke at my expense. But they were honest, and honesty is where healing begins. Across the hall, Derek emerged with Martin Cole. He looked exhausted. He took one hesitant step toward me before stopping. "I was wrong," he said. I believed he meant it, but I also understood that being sorry and rebuilding trust were 2 different things. "I hope you learn from today," I told him, "not because the court corrected you, but because the truth was available all along." He lowered his eyes. I walked outside into the afternoon sunlight, breathing in air that somehow felt lighter than it had in months. The disputed property would remain under court review. Independent experts would examine the questioned signatures, and whatever legal consequences followed would come through proper channels, not through anger or revenge. That was enough for me. People often think victory is watching someone else fall. I learned that real victory is refusing to shrink yourself so another person can feel taller. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Evelyn Shaw. It contained only one sentence. "Proud of you, Major. You let the record speak." I smiled, placed the phone back in my pocket, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Some battles end with medals. The most important ones end with the quiet certainty that you no longer need anyone's permission to know your own worth. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't proving people wrong. It's refusing to let their doubts define who you are. Many of us spend years waiting for recognition from family, friends, or the world, only to realize that our true worth was never dependent on their approval. Quiet integrity, patience, and honesty often outlast arrogance and pride. Even when your voice is ignored, your actions leave a record that cannot be erased. If this story touched your heart, remember to stand firm in your values and never shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Thank you for being here today. Share in the comments where you're watching from and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories about courage, dignity, and quiet justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next journey.